Hello, welcome to our presentation, Bridging Oral Research Methods to the Archive.
I'm Heidi Willers, a second-year PhD student in the WRL program.
And I am Hannah Benefiel, also a second-year WRL PhD student. Last year, both Heidi and I took English 501. It helped lay the groundwork for English 691, Archival Methods.
The Goggins book on serendipity and rhetoric writing and literacy research prepared us well for our work in the Archival Research Methods class. It raised our awareness of and sensitivity to those aha moments that we may have otherwise overlooked. Our best advice to new researchers as they enter the archives is don't be surprised if you're surprised.
In this class, we worked on processing for the archive 13 boxes of materials from ASU Professor Emeritus Stephen J. Pine. We came into the archive thinking that we knew what kind of project to look for. However, serendipity taught us that the archive would speak to us, not the other way around. Even though the job of processing intimidated us, we remembered pieces we read in 501, like the one by former ASU student Ryan Skinnell, and we knew that we were well equipped.
In English 691, we've undertaken 2 cooperative class projects, as well as 2 individual projects, an analytical and a theoretical project. My analytical project examines the texts and discourse circulating around Dr. Pine's work at key transition points in his career to see if the archival evidence indicates whether Dr. Pine was a maker of a disciplinary counterpublic. My theoretical project investigates how user experience theory can be applied to expand user access to archival collections.
My analytical project counts the various ways Pine uses the phrase "I am" in order to track the complicated identifications academics make. My theoretical project explores the embodied experience an archivist has while actually touching the archive. Next, we'll talk about the collaborative project our class worked on as a whole, processing the Stephen J. Pine collection.
Processing the collection allowed us to both preserve and describe it for future users. We combined insight gained from refoldering the materials with outside research to create the finding aid. This collection description includes its arrangement and provenance, access and copyright restrictions, a biographical note, a scope and content note, and the processing note. Each member of our team assumed various fluid roles throughout this project. We wanted you to have the benefit of their insight and experience as you consider pursuing future archival research projects.
My advice for novice researchers would be 2 things. The first one is if you're going in person, be sure to either call ahead or email ahead to find out if there are any requirements or forms or anything like that you need to do to get access to materials. And also make sure that there aren't any unexpected events at the archive that will prevent you from having access to the materials. Because sometimes those don't show up on the website until just before they happen. And nobody wants to make a whole big trip out to see a collection only to find out that they're redoing the shelving in the storage area and they can't retrieve anything. And it's also very helpful sometimes if you explain your research question in that process, that the archivist might know of another source you might like to see, or another archive that might have something that pertains to what you're doing or something like that that they can tell you about before you come, and that will give you more time to plan your research trip. And that actually leads into the second piece of advice, which is if you have a question, ask. Like, I've had a lot of novice researchers say, this is a stupid question, and it's not a stupid question. Like, we've heard stupid questions. However stupid your question is almost definitely not the stupidest question we've heard. And a lot of times what people mean by stupid question is just, I don't know how to do it. And the whole point of having archivists at the research desk is a lot of people don't know how to do it. I mean, we're there to help. We like questions, we like answering questions, we like helping, so feel free to ask. One of the biggest differences between this collection and some of the other ones I've processed is just the scope of his research. Like, he tried to look at fire on a really global scale and research fires all the way around the globe. And usually I've seen a much narrower focus in research, like fire, well, if we're using fire as an example, fire on a particular continent, fire in a particular ecosystem, something like that, not like a really fully global scope. So I think that's very interesting. And then how it's similar to other collections, I think just as a faculty person, this is very, very much what I would expect of a faculty collection. Like a lot of correspondence with colleagues, a lot of research, a lot of copies of one thing or another he was going to do something with. I mean, this is, in terms of formats, very much a faculty collection. I think probably the biggest change I've seen in archival practice has been the push for access. I started working in 2003, and a lot of the people who taught me had been brought up, professionally speaking, in a very archivists are in charge of protecting materials and making sure that materials are safe and preserved for future use. And they should not be accessed except by people who were qualified somehow to access them. And right about when I started working was when people started considering, what does qualified really mean? And why are these materials off limits to so many different classes of researchers? And starting to try to work to change that, and instead of having you can't see it be the default, have you can see it be the default. And so that's been kind of a slow moving change, but it's very different now than when I started 15 years ago. And the other thing I've seen a lot of change in is dealing with digital records. Again, when I started, we were still getting things mostly on paper, but now that people are starting to retire who learned to use Word at the very beginning of their careers instead of towards the very end, we're getting a lot more digital records that people need to know how to take care of, and that's becoming a much larger part of the archive's education and professional development system.
So my responsibilities include watching over the reading room, working the front desk, interacting with patrons, and furthermore working on collaborative efforts such as the Distinctive Collections blog. I've also been very fortunate to have been able to work on projects outside of my responsibilities and events outside of my responsibilities in the reading room. In general, I'm very blessed to have this opportunity because being able to interact with researchers, having that hands-on work, dealing with manuscripts and rare books, as well as seeing patrons interact and deal with rare books and manuscripts. It's always a joy to hear when they say that they found something that exactly they needed, and that's such a joy to hear. So that work has informed me of processing the Pine papers, especially when not only are you looking through a certain manuscript box, but when someone else is, and looking exactly at not only the finding aid and trying to help people, search for a particular collection or what exact folders they need, but furthermore, when you're looking through the collection and seeing that a particular folder, if it's labeled something, I might pass over it. And similarly, a researcher might pass over it. I think labeling of folders, in my experience as a user, is important. So I think that has informed my experience refoldering as well as processing the Pine collections with my classmates.
One of the valuable lessons I've learned from working in the archive is, astonishing as it seems, some people don't care that much about the past. And you can't make assumptions about how much other people are going to care about your subject, but it's always a joy to discover that some do care about the past, and that the materials that you're interested in have been saved all along the way and taken care of. So that's one big lesson, and it continues to shock and astonish me when I encounter people who don't care. Another important lesson I've learned is something that Vern Harris, who's a South African archivist and archival theorist, he calls it the archival sliver, and I think it's a really helpful concept. He reminds us that what gets documented is just a sliver of what happened, and that what gets kept of what gets documented is just a sliver, and that what researchers can actually access of what's been saved is just a sliver, so that we have a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a window onto what happened in the past, and that window itself is constructed, that it depends on power relations that are in place, and that's going to affect what we're able to see of the past. So that notion of the sliver, the tiny slice, and the window, the constructed window, those are important lessons. I hope they learn that the archives make arguments, and that everyone who's had a hand in putting together the archive has been making an implicit argument, whether very consciously constructing it or not. They've made an argument about what matters, and that's important to realize when you're looking at materials, that someone's made an argument about why this matters, that it does matter, and why it matters, and to try to investigate that. If you're looking for a mentor to help you get started with archival research, find other people who are interested in your subject, who are also doing archival work that you can ask them about. Ask them what their processes were. Ask them how and where they found the materials that they're using. I think it would be okay for me to tell this story that I have heard from a former student of mine, Barb LaPlatenay, telling about how when she and Lisa Mastrangelo discovered that they were both researching the same topic, they fell into each other's arms because they were so happy to find someone else who was interested in the same topic, and they helped each other. It was co-mentoring. So that has really stayed with me, that it's not a situation where you have to fear someone else who's interested in your same topic. They can be a resource for you. So cultivate relationships with other scholars, cultivate relationships with archivists. Also, you can find senior scholars who will be interested in projects in the field of rhetoric and composition. They are almost always participating in the special interest group at the 4Cs. There's a special interest group for people who are working with the National Archives of Composition and Rhetoric, and they're all people who have done archival work in the field. So that's a good group to get to know and to get involved with.
Our final cooperative class project involved reflecting on the insights we gained from working with the Pine papers this semester, and it culminated in this video.
As students of rhetoric, we should care about the archive not only to preserve history, but to make new meaning out of the past. We can also give a platform to voices and ideas that have been previously silenced. Thanks so much for listening. Please feel free to reach out with any questions.